A billionaire who hasn't smiled in decades meets a little girl who asks him one simple question, and suddenly everything in his world changes. Secrets come out, a family fights for love, and a single mother risks everything for her child. You won't believe how this story ends, so don't miss a second of it. Dear friend, what you're about to experience is not just a story. It's a deeply human journey about loss resilience and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances, in the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now let's begin. The ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco shimmered under 1,000 crystal lights, but no one noticed the grandeur that night. All eyes were fixed on a man in a black tuxedo sprinting across the marble floor, a small, lifeless girl cradled in his arms. His voice cracked through the stunned silence as he pleaded, "Stay with me, sweetheart. Please, stay with me." The man was Jonathan Drake, a billionaire whose name evoked power and perfection. Yet, in this moment, he looked more like a desperate father than a titan of industry. At the far end of the hall, Grace Williams, her gown torn and eyes wild with terror, screamed after him. "Why do you even care?" she sobbed, her voice shattering under the weight of years of abandonment. Jonathan turned briefly, his face a portrait of anguish. "Because she's the reason I remembered how to live," he rasped before disappearing through the grand doors that led to the waiting ambulance. How had it come to this? Just days earlier, Grace was a single mother fighting for a second chance. Her resume was impressive, but years spent raising her daughter Lily alone meant gaps in her career she couldn't explain to most employers. When she received an unexpected invitation to interview at Drake & Partners, one of the most prestigious architecture firms on the West Coast, she felt hope for the first time in years. But life wasn't kind enough to give her a perfect shot. The morning of the interview, Lily's babysitter canceled, forcing Grace to make an impossible choice: miss the opportunity of a lifetime, or bring her 7-year-old daughter along. She chose to fight. Grace's heart pounded as she entered the sleek glass tower in downtown San Francisco, clutching Lily's hand. The reception area smelled of polished wood and expensive cologne, and the receptionist's eyes narrowed the moment they saw the child. But Grace kept her head high, reminding herself she was doing this for Lily's future. When they were finally called upstairs, she never expected to meet Jonathan Drake himself. Known as the Phantom of the Bay, Jonathan hadn't appeared in public for nearly a decade, and few had even heard his voice since he lost his pregnant wife Isabella in a tragic accident. His legend was built on ruthless deals and impenetrable solitude. Jonathan's steel-gray eyes fell on Lily as soon as they entered. He tried to focus on Grace's carefully prepared portfolio, but his gaze kept drifting to the small, curious child beside her. Lily, fidgeting with her dress, looked up and caught his eyes. "Mister?" she asked softly, her voice impossibly pure in the sterile, intimidating office. "Are you Said?" Grace gasped, mortified, reaching to pull her daughter back, but Jonathan raised a hand, stopping her. He seemed frozen, as though Lily's question had pierced straight through the layers of armor he'd built over 25 years. His lips parted. "Yes," he whispered, his voice hoarse and unsteady. "I suppose I am." That was the moment everything changed. Lily walked over and wrapped her tiny arms around his leg. For a man who had built an empire on fear and respect, who hadn't accepted a handshake in years, the simple, fearless hug of a child cracked him open. The room, the office, the city seemed to blur around them as he knelt down to her level, placing a trembling hand on her back. tears pooled in his eyes, shocking even himself. Grace stood frozen, certain she had just destroyed the last opportunity she would ever have to give her daughter a better life. What no one in that office knew was how long Jonathan had been waiting for someone to see beyond his billions, his power, his legend. And it took the innocent eyes of a little girl to do what armies of executives, lawyers, and rivals never could remind him he was human. That night, he pulled out an old photo of Isabella he kept hidden in his study and traced her smiling face. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel completely alone. There are countless stories of billionaires making headlines for cruelty, greed, or scandal. But there's a quiet truth almost never told, that even those with the world at their feet can live each day suffocating under loneliness. Studies show that prolonged grief, especially after the loss of a spouse or child, can cause people to isolate themselves, convinced nothing and no one can fill the void. And yet research from the Mayo Clinic suggests that moments of genuine human connection, like the unexpected affection of a child, can release oxytocin, the bonding hormone lowering blood pressure, and even alleviating symptoms of depression. Lily's hug was more than an adorable moment. It was a lifeline. It's a powerful reminder that small acts of kindness can alter lives in ways we cannot imagine. Grace thought she had ruined everything, but in reality, Lily had unknowingly offered Jonathan a second chance to heal. And for anyone who has suffered in silence, the lesson is clear: hope can return in the most unexpected forms, often through the purest souls. As the paramedics worked on Lily Grace, and Jonathan shared a look that said everything words could not. It was the beginning of something neither of them understood yet, but both desperately needed. And what they could never have foreseen was how this fragile, terrifying moment in a grand ballroom would set off a chain of events involving family secrets, betrayals, and a fight for love and belonging. Before we move forward, let's explore the shadows of the past that have haunted Jonathan for decades, and the hidden truths waiting to shatter everything they've just begun to build. Long before Grace and Lily stepped into his life, Jonathan Drake was a name whispered in awe and envy through the gleaming boardrooms of San Francisco. But behind the polished glass of his skyscraper office, he was a man haunted by memories he never dared to confront. At just 37, Jonathan had it all: a thriving architecture empire, a marriage to Isabella, the only woman who could match his fierce ambition, and a future that promised everything. They were a golden couple, often seen hand in hand at galas under the chandeliers of Grace Cathedral, or strolling through Golden Gate Park, imagining afternoons they'd spend there with the son they were expecting. Then came the night that shattered him. It was raining hard the evening Isabella's car veered off the bridge. Jonathan was in Tokyo closing a deal that would make him one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. He learned of the accident through a midnight phone call that drained all color from his world. The woman who had given his life meaning was gone, along with the baby boy he had dreamed of raising. The guilt of not being there, the helplessness of being halfway across the world, settled over him like a storm cloud that never lifted. From that moment his heart hardened into stone, his days consumed by work, his nights spent in a penthouse too big and too empty. For years, Jonathan avoided places that reminded him of Isabella, the art gallery, where they bought their first painting, the small cafe in North Beach where she made him laugh so hard he nearly spit out his coffee, the nursery they decorated together that never heard a baby's cry. Friends drifted away as he isolated himself, his only companions the shadows of what might have been. At every milestone he achieved, there was a hollow victory. Awards, magazine covers, and Forbes lists meant nothing when he had no one to share them with. But what truly kept him awake in the dead of night was a betrayal that cut deeper than any business rival's scheme. His brother-in-law, Victor Ashford, had always blamed Jonathan for Isabella's death. In hushed arguments at family gatherings, Victor accused him of choosing money over family, of caring more about contracts than coming home. After the funeral, Victor vowed never to forgive him, and they parted ways with hatred thick in the air. What Jonathan didn't know then was that Victor spent the following decades quietly building his own empire, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at the man he deemed responsible for his sister's death. As Jonathan's influence grew, Victor's resentment festered until it became an obsession. He hired private investigators to scour Jonathan's life for weaknesses and bought shares in Jonathan's competitors to sabotage deals from the shadows. He even cultivated relationships with reporters who longed to reveal the dark side of the mysterious billionaire. For years, none of it touched Jonathan until Grace and Lily appeared, creating a vulnerability Victor had never anticipated. It was a conversation between Victor and a close friend at the Pacific Union Club that changed everything. Over glasses of whiskey, Victor learned the shocking truth. Lily wasn't just any child, she was his niece. Her father, who had vanished from Grace's life before Lily was born, was Victor's own estranged son. The revelation hit Victor like a thunderclap. His only grandchild had been hidden from him for years, raised without the Ashford name or fortune, and now she was wrapped in the protective arms of the very man he despised most. Victor saw a twisted opportunity. If he could expose Jonathan's vulnerabilities and convince the world that Grace was using her daughter to manipulate a grieving billionaire, he could reclaim Lily and destroy Jonathan simultaneously. He mobilized lawyers, threatened Grace with custody battles, and prepared a media blitz that would paint them as predators circling a wounded man's wealth. The truth is, many families, no matter how privileged or loving they appear, carry deep, festering wounds that can poison generations. Just as Victor's grief turned to bitterness, countless parents and grandparents cling to anger, unable to forgive tragedies or mistakes. In America, more than 2/3 of estranged family members cite unresolved grief and blame as the root cause of decades-long rifts, according to a University of Cambridge study. The Ashfords were no exception. One evening, as the fog rolled through San Francisco's hills, Jonathan sat alone in his study staring at the only photograph he still kept of Isabella. His fingers traced her gentle smile, and tears he thought had dried up long ago welled in his eyes. He whispered to the empty room, "I'm so sorry, Izzy. I've lost myself without you." His voice cracked as memories of what could have been played like a cruel movie reel in his mind. Isabella cheering at Lily's ballet recitals, both of them baking cookies in the kitchen birthday parties, filled with laughter echoing off the high ceilings of their old home. The life they should have had, the family he should have given her. This realization gutted him. For all his wealth, Jonathan understood he had failed at what mattered most, protecting the ones he loved. And now, with Victor's threats closing in, he feared he would lose Grace and Lily too, before he ever had the chance to show them what love could look like. The guilt of his past decisions and the shadows of old betrayals hung over him like an anchor, dragging him deeper into despair. He knew he had to confront both his pain and Victor's machinations if he was ever to find peace or build the family he secretly longed for. This part of the story reminds us that grief, if left unhealed, can twist love into something bitter and vengeful. It teaches us that acknowledging our regrets, facing our past, and asking for forgiveness are the first steps toward breaking cycles of pain. It shows that the ghosts of what could have been will never rest until we choose to live for what still can be. The Ashford family's lawyers moved with brutal precision. Letters arrived at Grace's small apartment in the Mission District, each one colder and more threatening than the last. You are hereby ordered to present the child known as Lily Williams for a paternity and custody evaluation. The latest notice read its language, dripping with entitlement. Grace's hands trembled as she read it under the soft kitchen light. She looked at Lily, who was coloring at the table, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering outside their tiny haven. The little girl's giggles were the only sound in the apartment, and they shattered Grace's heart with their innocence. She knew that if Victor Ashford succeeded, Lily's laughter would be silenced in the cold halls of the Ashford estate, raised not with love, but as a pawn in a generational feud. Jonathan tried to reassure Grace as they met in his office, overlooking the fog-covered Bay Bridge. "I have the best family attorneys in California," he promised, his voice steady even as his eyes betrayed his fear. But the law was clear. If Victor could prove Lily's father was his son, and that Grace was unable to provide a stable home, a judge could grant the Ashfords visitation rights or, worse, partial custody. Grace felt the walls closing in her dreams of a safe, loving future for Lily, crumbling with each legal threat. She wondered if she had been selfish, if bringing Lily to the interview with Jonathan had doomed them both. Guilt weighed on her chest like a stone she couldn't lift. Victor's lawyers weren't satisfied with court filings. Tabloid headlines soon screamed, "Gold digger mom," "Seduces billionaire and secret love child of San Francisco's elite." Grace's phone buzzed with calls from reporters wanting a comment on whether she had schemed to trap Jonathan for his fortune. Strangers shouted slurs as she walked Lily to school. The world felt suddenly dangerous, each day darker than the last. Grace couldn't sleep, haunted by the fear that she might lose Lily forever. She lay awake, listening to her daughter's soft breathing, tears soaking her pillow as she wondered how to protect her. The truth is, many single parents in America face legal nightmares when grandparents or estranged family members suddenly claim rights to a child they ignored for years. Studies from the National Center for State Courts show a rising number of cases where grandparents exploit loopholes, especially if one parent is absent or deceased. Often, these battles aren't about love, but control inheritance and the preservation of a family name. Grace realized she wasn't just fighting for Lily's happiness. She was fighting to keep her daughter from becoming a trophy in a family power struggle. Jonathan decided it was time to face Victor directly. One rainy evening, he stood in the marble foyer of the Ashford mansion, the same home Isabella once called hers. Victor descended the grand staircase, his face as cold as the polished stone floors. "You should have stayed away, Jonathan Victor," said his voice smooth and dangerous. "You've always taken what was mine, my sister, my legacy. I won't let you steal my granddaughter." Jonathan clenched his jaw, his voice trembling with restrained rage. "Lily isn't yours to take, Victor. She's a child, not a pawn. You abandoned your son when he needed you most, and you think you deserve her now." Victor's eyes flashed with something between fury and wounded pride. "Your hands are not clean, Jonathan," he hissed. "Your sins killed Isabella. Now you think a hug from a child makes you worthy of forgiveness." The words sliced deep into Jonathan's old wounds, but he refused to flinch. "This isn't about me," he said, voice low and steady. "This is about Lily and what she deserves." Their argument erupted into shouts that echoed through the cavernous mansion. Servants cowered in the shadows. Rain pounded the tall windows like a drumbeat of impending doom. In that moment, both men realized they were fighting not only for Lily, but for the ghosts of their own regrets. And in their eyes, the reflection of Isabella's memory flickered like a candle in a storm. Meanwhile, Grace found herself paralyzed by fear and doubt. Could she really stand against the Ashford name? Could she protect Lily when her own bank account barely covered rent? One night, as she folded Lily's tiny clothes fresh from the dryer, Grace broke down, crumpling to the floor with sobs that racked her body. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered, her tears soaking the soft pajamas in her hands. "I promised you I'd keep you safe." But as hopelessness threatened to swallow her, she remembered Jonathan's words the night they first faced Victor's threats together. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." She clung to that promise like a lifeline. The fight for Lily's future became a battle that reached far beyond one family. Jonathan called in experts on family law, child psychology, and even former judges to prepare a defense. They gathered evidence of Grace's devotion, Lily's well-being, and the Ashfords' long neglect. They built a case that painted a clear picture. Lily's happiness wasn't in a gilded mansion, but in the arms of the mother who had given up everything for her. Examples of similar cases appeared in the team's research. In one landmark Colorado case, a court ruled against grandparents with wealth and social clout, deciding that the child's emotional bond with their mother far outweighed material advantages elsewhere. These stories gave Grace hope that love and stability could still triumph over power and greed. This chapter of their story teaches us a lesson. Many of us forget that family isn't defined by blood alone. True family is built by trust, love, and sacrifice, qualities that can't be inherited but must be earned every day. It reminds us that sometimes the fiercest battles are fought not with fists or lawyers, but with unwavering love. Through the sleepless nights and tense courtroom days, Grace began to see glimpses of light. Lily, still oblivious to the legal war, would dance around their living room, singing songs and giggling her joy, a daily reminder of what they were fighting for. And though the path ahead remained uncertain, Grace knew one thing with absolute clarity: she would never stop fighting for the daughter who had given her life its truest meaning. The fog rolled in thick and silent over the coastline of Carmel by the Sea, wrapping the old Drake cottage in a blanket of mist that made it feel like a world apart from the chaos of San Francisco. Grace watched Lily asleep on the couch, her small chest rising and falling in steady breaths, and realized she hadn't felt this kind of quiet in years. When Jonathan offered them refuge here, she hesitated, terrified of what accepting help would mean. Yet the moment they arrived, Lily's laughter filled the air as she ran barefoot through the sandy backyard, chasing seagulls and squealing with delight. It was the first time Grace saw a hint of childhood innocence return to her daughter's eyes since the nightmare with the Ashfords began. One evening, Grace stood in the cottage kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner when Jonathan appeared in the doorway. He looked tired, his face shadowed by the weight of the legal battle still raging in the background. Yet his eyes softened the moment he saw Grace. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice low, almost shy. She hesitated, then handed him a carrot and a peeler. They stood side by side, their hands brushing now and then, the silence between them both awkward and strangely comforting. It was the first time Grace allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by fear or survival. As the evening stretched on, they shared stories over a simple meal. Grace told him about the day she found out she was pregnant, the terror of knowing she'd be alone, and the fierce love she felt the first time Lily's tiny fingers wrapped around hers. Jonathan opened up about Isabella, how they'd dreamed of starting a family, how he still woke some nights reaching for a wife who was no longer there. His voice cracked when he confessed, "I stopped believing I deserved another chance at a family a long time ago." There was something deeply healing in those quiet confessions. They were two people who had been broken in different ways, realizing they could help each other stitch the pieces of their lives back together. Research from the National Institute on Aging shows that older adults who form new supportive relationships after loss often experience improved mental health, reduced feelings of isolation, and even lower rates of chronic illness. The heart, it seems, can learn to hope again at any age. One night, a storm rolled in from the Pacific, battering the cottage with sheets of rain and howling winds. Lily awoke, crying, terrified by the thunder. Grace rushed to her gathering her trembling child into her arms. Jonathan appeared moments later, a flashlight in hand. Without a word, he wrapped them both in a blanket and held them until the worst of the storm passed. In that fragile moment, the three of them sat on the couch, huddled together as the house shook around them. It felt for the first time like a family. As dawn broke, a pale light revealing the damage the storm had done to the garden outside, Grace found Jonathan standing by the window. He looked older than she had ever seen him, and yet more human, more real. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said, softly, eyes still fixed on the waves crashing below. "I know you're afraid. I am too." Grace stepped closer, resting her hand on his arm. "I've been alone for so long, I don't remember how to let someone in," she whispered. "Then, let me remind you," he replied, his voice trembling with emotion. Examples of families who rebuild after trauma abound in real life. Widows who find love again, after decades single parents who remarry and blend children into new joyful homes. These stories prove that even the deepest scars can heal when trust is rebuilt brick by brick, conversation by conversation, moment by moment. But it takes vulnerability, the courage to speak fears out loud, and the patience to let another person stay through the worst nights. A few days later, Lily presented Jonathan with a crayon drawing she made of the three of them, holding hands standing in front of the cottage with a bright yellow sun overhead. "Is this what families look like?" she asked, her voice tentative. Jonathan felt tears prick his eyes as he took the paper, his thumb brushing over the uneven lines of Lily's handwriting, spelling out, "My family." He knelt to her level voice, hoarse, as he answered, "Yes, sweetheart. This is exactly what a family looks like." Grace watched them, her heart swelling with hope and fear in equal measure. She knew letting Jonathan into their lives meant risking heartbreak again, but she also knew there was no other way to move forward. The road to redemption, she realized, wasn't a grand gesture or a single choice. It was 100 small moments of kindness, honesty, and shared silence that slowly replaced pain with possibility. As the golden light of sunset bathed the cottage in warmth, Grace found herself daring to dream of a tomorrow where Lily could grow up surrounded by love, where laughter replaced fear, and where she could finally believe they all deserved a second chance. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel glittered beneath cascades of crystal chandeliers, but it was Lily's childlike drawings transformed into elegant centerpieces that stole every guest's breath. The annual Pacific Hearts Charity Ball was in full swing, but this year whispers about the event's theme of second chances filled the air more than any gossip of celebrity sightings. At the center of it all stood Jonathan Drake, his once guarded face open and warm as he welcomed donors and friends. By his side, Grace looked radiant in a simple flowing gown, her eyes searching the crowd anxiously for the small figure she loved most. Then Lily appeared at the top of the marble staircase, dressed in a sky-blue dress that shimmered like a summer morning. The room fell silent as she carefully descended, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked that afternoon near the coast. When she reached the bottom, Jonathan stepped forward, extending his hand. The crowd erupted into applause, unaware of the battles fought in courtrooms and darkened halls to make this moment possible. Jonathan took the stage, clearing his throat as he looked out over San Francisco's finest gathered before him. "For years, I thought building this company would fill the emptiness in my heart." He began, his voice steady, despite the tears glittering in his eyes. "I believed success would bring meaning to my life after losing Isabella. But it wasn't until a little girl hugged me in my office that I remembered what it felt like to be alive." Gasps and soft sighs rippled through the audience. Jonathan continued sharing how Grace and Lily had taught him the courage to hope again, to believe that love could heal even the oldest wounds. He announced the creation of the Isabella Drake Foundation for Children's Heart Health, fully funded to ensure children like Lily would receive care regardless of their parents' means. Guests rose in a standing ovation, moved by a story more powerful than any donation request could ever be. Grace watched Jonathan from the wings, her heart swelling with pride, awe, and a love she no longer tried to deny. After the speech, Lily tugged at Jonathan's hand. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her eyes wide and solemn. He knelt to her level, ignoring the curious stares around them. "Anything," he promised. "Do you want to be my daddy forever?" she whispered, her voice trembling with both hope and fear. The question pierced through the noise and music like a bell ringing in a quiet church. Jonathan's breath caught. He took her small hands in his tears spilling down his cheeks as he answered, "Yes, Lily, forever if you'll have me." The crowd, sensing something extraordinary unfolding, fell completely silent. Grace stepped forward, tears streaming down her own face as she watched Lily throw her arms around Jonathan's neck. Later that evening, they found a quiet balcony overlooking the glittering lights of the city. Grace leaned into Jonathan's side as he held her close, both of them wrapped in a peace neither had felt in years. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "I think it's just beginning," he replied. In the distance, the fog drifted gently through the Golden Gate as if the world itself was exhaling after a long, hard night. Stories like Grace and Jonathan's happen more often than we might think, though they rarely make headlines. Across the country, step families are formed every day when widows and widowers, single parents and divorcees find love again and create new blended homes full of second chances. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, over 30% of American households now include a step-parent or step-sibling, proving that family can be found in places we never expect. But while statistics may explain how common these new beginnings are, they can't capture the quiet courage it takes for someone like Grace to trust again after years of betrayal, or for a man like Jonathan to open his heart after decades of grief. These moments of vulnerability, asking to be a father, daring to love, risking heartbreak, are what truly define family. They remind us that bonds built from shared pain and healing can be even stronger than those forged by blood alone. One evening, weeks after the ball, Lily handed Grace a crayon drawing she'd made 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house by the ocean, the sun smiling overhead. Above them, she had carefully written the words, "My Forever Family." Grace's breath caught as she read it, overwhelmed by gratitude for everything that had brought them to this point, the heartbreak, the battles, and the small everyday moments of kindness that stitched them together. This final chapter in their story teaches us something simple but profound, that the past may shape us, but it does not have to define us. That love found in unexpected places can transform not just one life, but generations. And that when we open our hearts, no matter how broken, we can build a family stronger than we ever dreamed possible. In the tapestry of Grace Williams and Jonathan Drake's intertwined lives, what began as a desperate attempt by a single mother to secure a future for her daughter became a journey of healing, redemption, and the discovery of a family neither of them dared to hope for. Grace, hardened by years of abandonment and struggle, brought her spirited daughter Lily to a job interview that should have ended in disaster. Instead, Lily's innocent question and heartfelt hug cracked open the armored heart of a billionaire who had spent decades in self-imposed exile after the tragic loss of his pregnant wife Isabella. Their paths collided at a moment of quiet desperation, setting off a cascade of events. A fierce custody battle with the Ashford family, a relentless storm of gossip and accusations, and the revelation of secrets long buried beneath grief and resentment. Yet, through every challenge, Grace and Jonathan found strength not just in their growing love, but in their shared devotion to Lily, whose laughter became the beacon guiding them through the darkest nights. They learned to trust each other in a cottage by the sea, where quiet dinners and stormy nights forged bonds stronger than the wounds of the past. Jonathan discovered that vulnerability is not weakness, but the first step toward real connection, while Grace found that leaning on someone does not mean surrendering her independence. Together, they stood against threats of power and greed, proving that family is not simply defined by blood, but by the love we choose to give and the promises we keep. The night of the Pacific Hearts Charity Ball became their moment of triumph, where Jonathan declared his commitment to Grace and Lily before the world, and Lily claimed the father she had always dreamed of. Through it all, they taught each other and us that it is never too late to open our hearts to seek forgiveness and to believe that second chances can lead to a happiness more profound than we ever imagined. From their story, we draw a powerful moral lesson. True love and family are built on compassion, patience, and the courage to look beyond appearances. It reminds us to be gentle with ourselves and others, to offer understanding instead of judgment, and to remember that everyone carries burdens we cannot see. In a world often obsessed with power and perfection, Grace and Jonathan's journey shows us the quiet heroism of forgiveness, the importance of steadfast love, and the beauty of creating a family wherever love takes root. To apply this lesson in our own lives, we must practice kindness every day, listen with empathy to those around us, and find the bravery to reach out even when we fear rejection. By choosing compassion over anger, patience over haste, and love over indifference, we can heal not only ourselves, but also the hearts of those we hold dear. If this story moved you as much as it moved us in telling it, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world to us and inspires us to keep sharing heartfelt, meaningful stories that remind us all of the extraordinary power of love, forgiveness, and hope. Thank you for being here, and we can't wait to bring you the next chapter of stories that touch the soul.